My life has been, to put it bluntly, defined and shaped by Pikmin. That is, in itself, a statement some of you may find to be very odd, especially those who have not seen my channel before. But for anyone who knows me, that is perhaps the most unsurprising thing I have ever said. The Pikmin series is very near and dear to me, and I have many memories from the earliest bits of my life up until now with the games. Many of my fondest childhood memories come from these games, and I can say with confidence that I would not be who I am or where I am today without this series. Though I am recording this video a few days prior, I will not be releasing this video until October 26th, the 20th anniversary of the Pikmin series. I feel like it will be a fair tribute to the series to give my own personal history with Pikmin in this video, in roughly chronological order based on memory, and talk about my experiences with the games and how they changed my life. My name is Vantage Emblem, and today it's going to be a bit different. I'm not going to be analyzing anything or predicting anything, but I'm going to be looking back at my life and Pikmin's effect on it. I hope this will give you a bit of an insight on why I love this series so much, even if you've never played a game before. And if you're an experienced veteran of the Pikmin franchise, I hope that this story will align with yours a little bit and we can all just take a moment to understand how much this series means to us. That being said, I think it's about time we begin. Let's travel back to 2001. Pikmin 1 released in October of 2001, which is the same year I was born. My earliest memories are with my father, playing Pikmin on the GameCube, where he was teaching me how pellets work and onions work, and I was just understanding the mechanics of Pikmin. I remember being completely perplexed that yellow pellets did not produce yellow Pikmin, and that I actually had to have a majority of a specific Pikmin type bring that type of Pikmin back to their onion to be able to produce more of that Pikmin. Though initially it was just me watching my father play, this quickly grew into me playing the game for myself. I like to tell people that Pikmin helped me learn to read, because it's very true. When I was first playing the Pikmin games, I had no ability to read whatsoever and was just discovering the world. But as my understanding of things around me grew and I learned to read, I had Pikmin as a massive set of text that I could practice my reading ability with. It was interesting to discover new words and to try to figure out what they meant as I made my way through the games. I also had the Nintendo-powered guidebook for Pikmin 1 that I read religiously. It was the first time I understood that there were people that made games, game developers, and when I first learned about Shigeru Miyamoto. Reading the book, specifically the interview in the back, gave me so much joy, because I learned that there were people that were making Pikmin games as a job, and that maybe one day too, I could make a Pikmin game. This was a pure, innocent perspective, because I had no idea about copyright law or anything like that. All I knew was I loved Pikmin, and I really wanted there to be more Pikmin games, so if I could make one for someone, that would be wonderful. At this point in time of my life, Pikmin was my defining interest. I loved playing video games, and I, was getting a little older, and all I knew is that Pikmin was the best video game ever made. No, there was not a better game. Pikmin was, for me, my own sandbox, my own playground. I never even got close to finishing Pikmin 1. Despite playing it for so long, it took me years to unlock the blue Pikmin in the Forest Navel. But with just the reds and yellows, I went on so many adventures in the Forest of Hope and in the Impact Site. I would build up hundreds and hundreds of Pikmin, just afraid to press on, but comfortable in the areas I had already been. I was invested in knowing and exploring the areas I had already conquered, and maybe if I was brave enough I would break down a bomb rock wall and discover a whole new section of the world to explore. It was wonderful, and my family took note. It was approaching a birthday, or maybe Christmas, I can't remember, and my grandfather had apparently asked my father what I was interested in. My father replied, "Pikmin." My grandfather didn't understand, but he didn't let that stop him. My grandfather did an absurd amount of research about Pikmin 1 without really even playing any video games. And the conclusion he came up with shocked me. I remember being given a gift by my grandfather that changed my childhood. Taking screenshots from the game, however he had acquired them, my grandfather put together a Pikmin coloring book. Now, there was no such thing as a Pikmin coloring book at this point in time, and I'm not sure if there is, but at least one exists because my grandfather made one for me. It was wonderful. I remember sifting through the pages, transfixed by the fact that I could color my own Pikmin book. Look, I was a little kid, this was exciting. And in one of the pages, in the very beginning, I remember reading something very heartfelt. There was text, and it said, "Where will your journey begin, Captain Alex?" Laugh all you may, but those words meant a lot to me back then. This was my Pikmin coloring book. I was the only person in the world to have it. I recognized that I was very lucky. It didn't matter that it wasn't a real book, that it was made out of a binder with some printed out pages. It meant a lot to me. My grandfather would later go on to be the person to introduce me to YouTube when we would eventually go looking for Pikmin content together, and that was a life-changing experience. But we'll get to that. I was not expecting Pikmin 2. I didn't understand hype or game releases or that there even could be a sequel to Pikmin at this point in time. I didn't know what a sequel was, to be completely honest, outside of the Star Wars movies. But when that game showed up, my world changed. I remember sitting on a couch and my dad just brought this game to me. It was a beautiful spring day, and as my father opened the door, I looked up and he handed me something that would change the world for me. It was Pikmin 2, the GameCube game, in its case, brand new, and as I looked in the box, I saw two new types of Pikmin. Large purple Pikmin with what looked like spikes off of the side of their heads, and white Pikmin with big, beady red eyes. Immediately, we put in the game and started playing. I was transfixed by the interesting winter level, which was new for me. I had always believed, up until then, from the box art of Pikmin 1, that the distant spring was a winter level, but I'd never made it that far in Pikmin 1. I kinda just assumed that game went on forever. With Pikmin 2, though, the game opens with the Valley of Repose, and I was so excited to explore. I remember being transfixed by the opening cutscene, absolutely immersed by the gameplay, and completely perplexed when I hit the first cave. You see, the caves changed everything. First, inside, I found a treasure that could only be carried by 101 Pikmin. That's impossible. You can't even get 101 Pikmin. This is obviously remedied by the purple Pikmin, but before heading deeper into the cave, I didn't know this. In fact, it was the caves that told me I didn't know anything about this game. Though I had never finished the game, and though I had hardly really progressed, I'd become very comfortable in the core mechanics of Pikmin, of throwing Pikmin, of whistling them, building new Pikmin, etc., etc. With Pikmin 2, however, there was a major shakeup in the formula. First off, there was no day limit, which made me believe the game really could be infinite. In addition, there were new purple Pikmin that completely broke existing rules and broke series conventions. And I say series conventions, but really, there wasn't a series. There was just one game beforehand. Pikmin 2 was the game that established conventions for me. For example, red Pikmin. They were the first Pikmin you discovered in Pikmin 1. There was no rule saying they had to be the first Pikmin you discover in Pikmin 2, but Pikmin 2 established this, and it's been the same into Pikmin 3, and presumably will be the same into Pikmin 4. These series conventions were really established by the second game, and it gave me a lens on what a Pikmin game is and what it could be. And for my young mind, this game completely took me out of my comfort zone. I was starting to understand the very basics of color theory back in the day, and my immediate brilliant idea when I brought the purple Pikmin out of the cave was, hey, they're both red and blue. Those two colors together make purple. They should be immune to fire and able to swim. And I immediately drowned all of my purple Pikmin. Some lessons are best learned from trial and error. And back then, that was the only way I could learn lessons about this game. I had no access to anything like YouTube or even a Nintendo Power guidebook to really guide me through Pikmin 2, whereas I had a guide for Pikmin 1. So this game was completely an enigma to me at this point in time. I decided to take it slowly, and the caves, which were terrifying, complex caverns, these monstrous, potentially infinite-feeling landscapes that I would navigate with huge boss fights at the end, these caves really changed the way I approach things. I became slow, meticulous, spending thousands of hours in this game just exploring the same overland landscapes and delving into the same caves over and over, slowly building up my confidence to go into the next one. White Pikmin made things even more interesting because treasures could be hidden anywhere. I never wanted to go into a cave without White Pikmin, for fear I could be missing something. I would keep misplacing my memory cards and starting the game over and over again, but that's okay. It was the strength of getting really comfortable with the core mechanics that I think made the game even more enjoyable as I played it more and more. I would slowly get back to where I had progressed to before, and then I would push forward. Then I would lose the memory card again and start a new save and slowly progress to where I had made it to that time, and then potentially progress a little forward. Eventually, I had done what seems like an impossible task. I had made it to Blue Pikmin in Pikmin 2, and the whole game had opened up to me. Though curiously, I had noticed that there were only 3 areas: a winter area, a spring area, and a summer area. On the map, it looked like there could have been a fall area, but I had found no way to unlock it. Long did I dream of this potential 4th fall area, but it was like a myth to me. I would look into the horizons of the map and wonder about secrets that could be found beyond its borders. Perhaps there was more world to get to as I kept pushing forward. Every time I broke down a gate and explored more, I thought, wow, this is the most expansive game world ever. Granted, this is a completely silly belief, but for a young me, Pikmin was the perfect playground to explore. Not only that, it was a story. A very interesting and impactful story to my young self. The Piklopedia and Treasure Hoard added first-person notes from Olimar and other characters that drastically changed my enjoyment of the series. Olimar had given first-person notes in Pikmin 1, but they were dry and tutorialistic. Whereas in Pikmin 2, it really felt like it had given a new lens, an open lens, into every bit of Olimar's life. Every single treasure told me something new about him, about his family, about his planet, about random things like hot springs, vacations, what his family liked to do. The emails at the end of the day also provided information. I got to see what Olimar was thinking about every single bit of his planet, his work, his new planet that he was exploring through the creature logs. I got to see what he thought about the enemies. I even got to see interactions between him and other characters through the lens of the ship's conversations. Sure, Olimar never responded to the ship, and nor did Louis, but their silence often indicated much in the context of the conversations with the ship. The game was forgiving yet tough, expansive yet limited and safe, terrifying and yet familiar, friendly, and calming. This game was clearly my happy place as a child, and although I had been playing a lot more games at this point, it was my favorite and still remains one of my favorite games of all time. But one day, it had become apparent that I had never even scratched the surface of what Pikmin 2 had to offer. I was spending time with my grandfather again, when he had showed me a new website several years after the game's release. A place I was told not to go to by my father, but my grandfather insisted that it was okay. He was there to guide me and keep me safe. It was a place called YouTube, where apparently people could upload videos about anything. It was here I discovered amazing things. Pikmin 1 had a 4th Pikmin type, Purple Pikmin. These strange mushroom Pikmin are different from the purple Pikmin I have, and Pikmin 2 yielded Bulbmin, these strange bulborb Pikmin that were immune to everything. There was a dangerous place called the Submerged Castle that I had read about but not ever seen, and I didn't actually see footage of it during this time, but I had heard whispers, and I was enthralled. Holidays, birthdays, everything else went by, and my family got together and got me Pikmin figures, Pikmin plushies, and all sorts of other Pikmin merchandise. My birthday cake at some point even was Pikmin themed. Despite the jump scares, despite the overwhelming fear of entering some of these caves, despite the terrifying beady long legs that appeared at a certain point in the overworld area of the perplexing pool, I found myself sticking with this game above all others. There was something about it that just would not be grasped by another game series until eventually I would get into Fire Emblem years later. Eventually, with Pikmin 2, I finally made it to Bulbmin by making my way up with Blue Pikmin to the submerged castle, though after finding Bulbmin, I stopped the game for a good long time. It seemed for some reason that finding Bulbmin was the goal for me, not even paying off the debt or even finishing this cave. Once I found them, I never even used them, and I certainly didn't encounter the Water Wraith. I just stopped. And that was the place where I put the game down for a bit. But I didn't let Pikmin go. My love of Pikmin had just evolved into something different. It was Christmas, 2008, and I was given a gift. It was a game I'd seen in the store, and I thought that the poster was interesting, but my parents told me that I couldn't have it. I thought it was inappropriate or something like that, and that's why I wasn't allowed to get it, but it turns out they had actually bought it for me already, and I just accepted the fact that I wasn't going to get this game. I had known nothing about this game when I had first seen it in the store. I didn't know what it was, I was just intrigued by the art style. The box art yielded cartoonish, stylized, and interesting looking aliens that had caught my attention. When I eventually opened up the game, I read the title, Spore, and knew this was the game I had seen in the store. I rushed down to my computer and spent the necessary time installing the game from the disc and went through all the processes needed to set up a game with my dad. Eventually, I opened it up, and I began a journey. I created a cell in the cell stage editor, and it prompted me for a name. I didn't know what to do, so I had named it Green Pikmin, spelt horribly wrong. But there was that love of Pikmin that proliferated into my creations in Spore. Spore and its expansion, Galactic Adventures, changed everything for me. Spore allowed me to create my own Pikmin content and eventually to share it with the world. It wasn't any good, but it was more content, and eventually I discovered content of others as well. You see, this was during the first big dry spell of Pikmin content, when there wasn't really anything releasing after Pikmin 2, and it was starting to show. There was, of course, the rumors of the long-awaited Pikmin 3 to release on Wii, but even around 2008, that was nowhere to be seen. So, on my own, I had made several Pikmin in Spore, and made each of their different colors into different tribes. Pikmin Wars, I called it, and each color was its own different group. The reds were warriors, the blue, aquatic, almost Aquaman-like Atlantean Pikmin, and the yellows were wizards. The white Pikmin were assassins, and the purple Pikmin, I don't even remember what they were. I think they were like military, like, you know, hard hats and World War II style combat. I don't know. I was like 8. But I made my own Pikmin in Spore. They were terrifying. They didn't look cute. I don't know. They hardly classify as Pikmin, but I thought it was the coolest thing. When Spore Galactic Adventures released, the expansion for Spore, it changed everything. Because now, not only were there Spore creations that were Pikmin, there were whole Spore levels, missions that were Pikmin themed. Some of my favorites included Shadow Raptor 101's Pikmin Chronicles missions, which were a series of strung-together Spore fanfiction, essentially, where it had all sorts of Pikmin content post-Pikmin 2. It was a pseudo-Pikmin 3, in a way, and it included interesting ideas like a purple Pikmin onion and other things like that. I ended up really enjoying Shadow Raptor's content and other content by other Spore creators, and it was something that held me over until the inevitable announcement of Pikmin 3. It is ironically during Pikmin's downtime between games that I felt I became knowledgeable in Pikmin, through Spore specifically. I had finally seen more of this mysterious water wraith done in horror-style adventures, and even though I hadn't encountered it, I knew it was something to be feared. Olimar Louie, and the Pikmin ended up being almost my friends, but also my tools to interact with this world, and I found it was better than nothing. I'd engaged with Pikmin fanon as a whole, and found that fan content was the only way I could potentially even pretend to experience a Pikmin 3. I spent every day waiting for that announcement, and one day, when I least expected it, it came. Let's set the scene. It was a cool summer night, and I was pretending to be asleep while reading the Heroes of Olympus book series under my covers. At some point, my dad entered my room and excitedly woke me up. I thought I was in trouble because I was reading and I should probably have been asleep, but instead my dad took me out to the family computer, and on it, he showed a presentation. It was that Shigeru Miyamoto fellow that I had read about and seen pictures of at this point, and he played what was my first experience with E3 or hype of any sorts. It was a trailer. I'd not really seen trailers before, and watching it, it blew my mind. It was for Pikmin 3, basically a big advertisement for Pikmin 3, and it had a new Pikmin type, Rock Pikmin. They could be used to break down glass walls, and the gameplay was wonderful, and my mind started racing, and I was watching it transfixed by how polished it looked, how wonderful the game looked, how I was freaking out. I was freaking out. At the end, flying by, there seemed to be another type of Pikmin, a winged Pikmin. They didn't show me what it could do, but I saw it, and my immediate thought was, that's a pink Pikmin there. We've got rock Pikmin and pink, maybe magenta Pikmin. I lost my mind. And at this point in time, the speculation ball began to roll. I had hardly used the internet to do anything beforehand, but this game changed that. Every day, I spent Google searching Pikmin 3. And eventually, that led me to YouTube to watch the trailer over and over again. And eventually, that led me to discover Pikmin content on YouTube. I started watching theories and speculation. I had seen channels like Daz Reviews that were talking about the individual frames of the trailers and breaking down what was going on and speculating all sorts of content, and it was blowing my mind. I had my hype built up by Spore as well, which I was still concurrently playing. Users like ShadowRaptor101 now began building things from the Pikmin 3 trailers and speculating about their names and what they could be and what could be in Pikmin 3. And every time Nintendo showed off more gameplay footage, my mind went crazy. There were so many plot speculations. Why wasn't Olimar one of the main characters? What was going on? Were these new characters members of Olimar's family, perhaps his daughter and son grown up? Or were they someone else entirely? What was going on? What was going on? This question rang through my mind, and I was so excited to learn all that Pikmin had to show. They had shown footage with weather. Perhaps there would be weather effects. They had shown footage with what looked like an ink hazard. Maybe there was a new type of Pikmin. My mind was on fire as I spent every day longing for this game to release. But, of course, I didn't really pay attention to the release date until it was very close. And when that happened, I spent every day knowing I was just one day closer to finally playing another Pikmin game. When I finally actually got the game, it was everything I could have hoped for and more. Even though my theories didn't necessarily align with what I got, it was a wistful, wonderful, incredible adventure through exotic and brilliant locations that cathartically lifted up my spirits and gave me more content. It was the first Pikmin game I ever finished, too. That week, when I started playing it, I just couldn't stop, and I eventually finished it. I didn't collect all the fruit or collect all the treasure or anything, but that first playthrough was so satisfying that I just put the controller down when I finished, teared up a bit, and accepted I'd finished a Pikmin game, and I had just played Pikmin 3. It was one of the happiest moments of my life, which I know sounds silly, but with how much the series had meant to be, it really just resonated. The gameplay was quick, just like the new Play Control titles that had released a few years before, and everything about it was very rigid, very strongly designed, almost like I've heard it described by some people now like an Apple product, where it's very clean, very pristine, and that's exactly how it felt. Where the first two Pikmin games felt rough in comparison, this game was perfect, well-planned, and brilliant. No wonder it took so long. Now, of course, after this, I had skipped out on the DLC because I couldn't buy it on my own, but I had spent a lot of time in the existing mission mode missions and playing the game over and over again, eventually getting all the fruit and feeling quite happy about it. This game gave me a renewed fervor, and I had returned to Pikmin 2. I had found out about the Wistful Wild online during the hype of Pikmin 3, and I decided to actually get there. I actually paid off the debt instead of doing my schoolwork, and actually confronted the Water Wraith, which was brilliant. It was so stressful, so tense, but also so cool. I discovered I loved survival, action, horror like that. I wasn't a big fan of gore, but I did appreciate the brilliant pacing of things like the Submerged Castle. I was blown away when I discovered the Wistful Wild for the first time. No, literally, the Gatling Groink came into my base location and attacked me with its explosives. So I was quite literally blown away. Leaving the base location after finally fighting it off with just what seemed like endless red Pikmin, I explored a world of my favorite season, fall. And I discovered something that required 1,000 Pikmin to pick up. That's 100 purples. Blew my mind. There was just so much difficult content here. New caves, new everything. I finally explored the back areas of all of the Pikmin games, Pikmin 1 and Pikmin 2, and of course Pikmin 3, and eventually I started to clear out all the caves in the upper levels of the Valley of Repose, while also going back to Pikmin 1 and finally exploring through the Forest Navel, encountering the Mushroom Pikmin, and finally getting to the Distant Spring. I never completed Pikmin 1 and 2 during this time period, though. It seems that, apparently not doing schoolwork was catching up on me, and eventually I had to put the games back down and just hunker down and get really invested in school, which was a very, very hard thing to do with someone who had such a hard time focusing on anything other than games. This is when the great content drought really began between Pikmin 3 and the still yet to be revealed Pikmin 4. But I got into other games like Fire Emblem at this point in time, so it worked out. But of course, I held out hope for Pikmin 4. Just like Pikmin 2 had released right after Pikmin 1, I assumed that Pikmin 4 would easily release in Pikmin 3's engine, and we would just be able to play it. That never happened. we still have not seen Pikmin 4, and unfortunately this Majora's Mask out of Ocarina of Time style of release never happened for it. But I do remember theorizing for Pikmin 4 still, discovering things like Davagato's Umibozu theory for Pikmin 3, and Googling Pikmin 4 daily, constantly, for many, many months. I got more Pikmin plushies, including the ones for Pikmin 3, and I was still very invested. I missed the short movies back during this time, though. I was aware they existed, but I had never bought them on the 3DS or Wii U eShop, and even though I was really excited they existed, I didn't get a chance to watch them until they were officially posted by Nintendo on YouTube years later, during the hype for Pikmin 3 Deluxe, so that was a long time. I watched my favorite creators theorize and play, and I myself was still invested in the Pikmin games. Pikmin 3 had become part of the trinity of Pikmin games, and there really wasn't anything else, other than, say, Nintendo Land's Pikmin Adventure game, which I had hardly touched. However, I kept diving deeper and deeper into the Pikmin content that existed, eventually discovering unused content, Pikmin hacking, Pikmin files and data mines, and all sorts of things that were pulled out of the game, didn't make it in, such as the Emperor Bulbulax in Pikmin 3, and so on and so forth. And that was about all I could get, but it was more than sufficient. Though I was never of the technical ability to contribute to this part of the fandom, they certainly kept my love for Pikmin going strong, and I will always be appreciative to them for that. At some point, Hey Pikmin released, and I remember it being a fun little title, but I wasn't really hyped about it. I was about as excited as I was for Olimar to be in Smash or Alf to be in Smash 4. I played it. I loved and enjoyed the respect it gave to the series, but I wished it had been a little more complex and Pikmin-like, almost like a Pikmin Metroidvania. I did eventually return to this game and finish it, but it took me several years, which I guess is par for the course for Pikmin games. If a new Pikmin game were to actually release today, I would finish it in probably a week. And I know that. Just the fact that I grew up with them gave the original 2 entries a sort of mystery and intrigue that I wasn't able to tap and wasn't able to finish the games quickly because of. It didn't help that theories like the Umibozu theory gave the game such power, such darkness. I found over the years that the idea of something so light and innocent being plunged into darkness was a trope I really appreciated in fiction. A lot of stories that would really grab me would have the same sort of aesthetic, and I really appreciated it. Over the years of the content drought, many creators started to disappear. I saw people leaving the YouTube space, but I also discovered new YouTubers like Scruffy and Arlo that covered Pikmin that I really appreciated. I was growing up and becoming an adult and finding my place in the world. I was making my own music now, and I decided to make game design a career. It harkened back to those old days of reading Pikmin and realizing that there were people that made it, and I still carried that belief with me. I wanted to make games. Maybe not necessarily Pikmin games, but, well, I did hope I could potentially make a Pikmin or Fire Emblem-like of my own at this point. As I set off into college, the world went into crisis. I don't need to elaborate. You know the year, you know what happened, and I was at home a lot more than I expected. It was during this time that I replayed all of the Pikmin games and completely 100%ed them. This included Pikmin 1 and 2 on GameCube, Pikmin 3 on Wii U, with all control schemes, New Play Control Pikmin. I finally got to the point where I decided to buy the Pikmin 3 DLC. I knew that the day I decided to buy that DLC, from the moment the Switch was revealed, that a Pikmin 3 New Play Control port would be revealed for the Switch, and it would have the DLC, and I wouldn't end up buying it. Literally the next day, Pikmin 3 Deluxe was announced. My weird, nonsensical speculation just happened to be right. There was no logic behind it, it was just a gut feeling that apparently was clairvoyant in some way, but I'm not really superstitious in that way, but you know what? Worked out for me this time. And of course, with another Pikmin game comes a hype cycle, comes an excellent demo, comes side stories and more content. When it finally released, it took Pikmin 3 from my least played but favorite title to my most played and still my favorite title. At this point, the mystery of all of the games were gone. I was so familiar with them. I was playing Pikmin mods at this point, things like Colossal Caverns, but my love for Pikmin was more than rekindled, not that it had ever gone away in the first place. I started getting into making my own Pikmin-like music. I started this channel. I invented Minute Breath, a Pikmin-inspired D&D setting based loosely on the perspective from those Spore adventures years ago, from Pikmin, and from things like The Secret World of Arrietty, a Studio Ghibli movie. I met several creators I looked up to and learned more about Pikmin lore than I'd ever done before. I watched Pikmin 2 ROM hacks come to life, and some of them die out, but their ideas were brilliant. I shared theories with other creators like Davagato back and forth, and it was a wonderful time. This game even inspired me to take my first steps. Online, I'd found a Pikmin-like game by an indie dev called The Distant Planet. After some messaging, I loosely auditioned for the role of composer and won the spot. I became the game's composer. Now, development for this game is ongoing and a strong part of my life, and I am quite happy to be working on it. Even though Pikmin 4 is still yet to even be revealed or to ever release, and it may never, I am happy knowing that I'm developing a game in the same vein as this series. It's obviously not a Pikmin game, and I'd like to make that clear. I do not own Pikmin, as much as I would like to, and I don't have any of the copyrights or relevant IP to actually make a Pikmin game. But we're working on the next best thing. Something that keeps parties that actually own Pikmin happy, while also making something that fulfills that niche. As for me, I'm working on this channel now, making more music, and setting off into the world of game design. So, as I look to the future, I see that I will be delivering more Pikmin content, probably forever, because I feel like it's such a vital part of who I am. And I hope that Nintendo does the same, because I would like to experience more Pikmin content. If Pikmin 3 Deluxe's sales and the success of Metroid Dread are anything to indicate, perhaps Pikmin 4 isn't as far off as I thought. So, here's to the future. A future with Pikmin gummies and a Pikmin mobile app and Pikmin in real theme parks and deluxe ports of games including Pikmin 3, the overwhelming success of long-dormant Nintendo series with Metroid Dread and other games, and of course, if nothing else, the Distant Planet. Even though it seemed bleak at times for Pikmin fans, I see a bright tomorrow. I mean, even games like Custom Robo, which have been long abandoned by Nintendo, are starting to find a home on Nintendo Switch, even if it's only for Japanese fans. And as I take my steps further into game design, I'm going to help carve part of the path forward to seeing more games like Pikmin. If nothing else, even if we never see a Pikmin 4, the series has left a lasting legacy that I am happy to say will blossom into something. It will grow from seed and eventually flower into something brilliant. Looking back, all of this started from humble roots of a potentially false story of Shigeru Miyamoto gardening and seeing ants, and it was something that sprung into an idea and a franchise that I know was always there for me. A dumb, cute game about throwing plant people to make money and collect oversized fruit. It sounds silly, but it means so much to me, and to others too. I wouldn't make this bloated, long, and honestly ridiculous video if I didn't really feel like I needed to say something. For a game series nostalgic like my own backyard, tiny in scale, and taking an interest in the small things, to times of my youth just hanging out in Pikmin, from the best of times to the worst of times, yeah. I want to give a thank you to Pikmin, to Shigeru Miyamoto and the team that put these games together and marketed them and made them as wonderful as they are. I want to give a thank you for everything. Happy 20th birthday, old friend.